or?
I would stay away from ETs. You know, one thing that I'm not well known for is my research on ETs, and I have written about them, but I've really been really low key, and people don't even know about that aspect of my research. But I point out to people that are familiar with the awake community. I would point out to them that William Cooper, who's
Hmm.
quite famous, and Stan Deyo, both of them began exposing the ETs, and over a period of time came to realize that these were actually demonic fallen angels. And
Right.
uh, and then speaking of the trauma-based mind control, Kathy O'Brien's helper, Mark Phillips, he made a point of telling people that this whole ET thing is a deception. And that's what I would stress is that there aren't any good extraterrestrials. These aliens are not good. If we understand the higher dimension, see, we live in, we talk about a three-dimensional world, but actually there's another dimension, space-time. But you talk about we're living in this four-dimensional world here, and when you go into the higher dimensions, things get so complicated. There aren't rules, you know, like in our dimensions, we have the laws of nature and the law of gravity. Things are rational, and that's why you can have the subject of physics. You go to the higher dimensions, and they're lawless. They're too complex. And so, from what I have been able to determine is that these things are coming from higher dimensions, and they're quite malevolent. They're not, they hate the human race. Some people call them in the system, they call them NHEs, non-human entities. That might be as a good way to call it, NHEs. These non-human entities are not doing anything for our favor. And then in the deprogramming, uh, when you get into the trauma-based mind control programming, the alien programming is far more powerful than the Illuminati's trauma-based mind control. So we're looking at something really dangerous there. You asked
Oh,
me about. Go ahead.
I didn't know that the aliens did programming, so that they've actually taken it upon themselves to run some kind of MK Ultra program.
Yeah, they're involved with the mind control. That's true. And you know that when people get taken by, they have missing time. I would describe these ETs as Satan's foot soldiers. Yeah, there's a lot of missing time and programming. I'll just pull out one little. I interviewed. This was back in the early '90s. I interviewed a man who had been abducted for years, and he had only glowing things to say about the entities that abducted him. They're I can't remember, 500,000 light years ahead of us, in their technology and their morality, blah blah blah. That was what he was spouting. But then, as I interviewed him, it turned out that every time that they abducted him, they buggered him without his will. He was not wanting to be buggered, but they buggered him. And this is when somebody can rape you repeatedly, and then you say that they're benevolent. That's mind control. Okay, so
What can I ask? What did the ET get out of having sex with a human creature. Surely that would be beneath them. Or did they do it as is it a probe? Are we talking probes here? Because that's what Whitley Strieber used to say about the probes that they used. Yeah? I mean...
Well, I would say that what they're doing is traumatizing people to keep them dissociative, and then programming them to say that it was good. You
I
know,
see. Yeah.
they're constantly buggering children that get programmed. Are there's a whole series of pedophiles that will then rape them repeatedly as they grow up, and that keeps them in a dissociative state, because they're having these horrible experiences. And see, the mind. See, if I could take you somewhere, Christine, and let's say there was hypothetically an island. It's not Madeira, by the way, but an island somewhere that was totally safe, where you could get away from anybody that was going to do anything to you, and your mind felt totally safe. Your mind, being an incredible thing, could pull itself together and heal itself. So
Right.
they don't want the mind to overcome the mind control and pull itself together. They want to keep you traumatized and in fear. It's your internal program. You know, so like think of it this way: if you were to make a machine, you have to sit there and program and watch that machine and constantly monitor it. That's not as good as creating a machine that will run itself. You know, like out here in Kansas, we have an irrigation system called and you want that sprinkler system to be autonomous as much as possible. That it will run itself and turn itself on. It will run itself by itself. You won't be out there fiddling with it. So this mind control is incredible, and the person is controlling themselves. It doesn't have to come from an external source. They've already been in control when you walk the path that you're living. So, you know, for instance, in my life, uh, they watched me constantly. It was sort of like the movie Enemy of the State, where it was really crazy. You know, my car would be tag team followed. My phone was obviously being listened to. I mean, it was just this excessive monitoring, and doing it in a way that you know, they're right in your face the whole time. And then they sent me to prison. And after that, they didn't need to control me as much because my reputation had been dirtied. And a lot of people, all they see is I was accused of aiding and abetting a bank robbery. And so all they see, and that bank robbery was 5 minutes. And there was no evidence ever produced that I was involved in it. But the thing is once they manage to get that label, that jacket on me, why that goes with me everywhere. And so it's one way to control me. Yeah, so they love to dirty everybody, and a large share of the politicians, they have files on them that are, they can send any of those guys to prison. They have the dirt on them. They're blackmailed, and so that's just a common practice that they like to use.
Is there anything you can do to fight back against it? I mean, okay, if they are dealing with these higher beings, and that's what makes them the Illuminati, why can't we be peasants? Why can't we deal with those higher beings? So we're supposed to go, oh no, they're evil, yada yada. But all the time we're being repressed by other human beings who are dealing with them. So why don't we just deal with them? Why don't we cut out the middleman that are keeping us squashed? Sorry, I know it's
Well,
your turn now, Brian, but I'm sure you won't mind. Why don't we get cracked on with interacting with fallen angels, and why don't we become the Illuminati? Why do we have to sit in shit and be falsely accused of bullshit? I mean, why do we have to do that? It's like
well,
nonsense.
we can rise above it, Christine. That's what Christ was all about.
Oh God, so we
And
put on our sackcloth and ashes, you mean?
well, he he wasn't running around in sackcloth and ashes, but no. And maybe you have a negative attitude towards him, but when
I don't know. He was okay. Really, he had his life. I've had a pretty bad life of constant shit, sexual abuse, violence, now reputation ruined, living in poverty, yada yada yada, experience homelessness. I'm not having fun, and now I'm thinking, is this going to be passed on to my son? So I'm really quite angry about it. I don't have a negative view towards Christ, but I do think, why shouldn't I interact with the Djinn or fallen angels and get my little army sorted and start doing magic against people that are targeting me? Why do I have to sit back and say, well, I'll leave it to them to interact with these beings, and I'll just sit here and pray? I mean, it's futile, really. I mean, okay, no, prayers do get answered, and I certainly did some magic, but I mean, why can't we get cracked on and doing Djinn magic, etc.? I know Brian does.
well, okay, so I'm not advocating you do magic, but I will say this: if one really begins to understand spiritually what Christ did, there's a human reaction to problems. It's either fight or flight, right? We either fight or we run. But Christ did neither, and he advocated for himself. So there's certainly a place to advocate for yourself. But what he did was is he advocated for himself through love. We we can't use the same dirty tactics as the enemy. So it's like some people that were programmed, they were hoping that I would use programming to free them from programming. I wouldn't do that. Um, and getting back to what I was saying, in the Word of God, it says that the wise, these people that are turning people to righteousness, justification, they're going to shine like stars. So you asked me about the shining ones, and they're, they're. If you go to like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which has many different variations of it, but in one variation in chapter 134, they say, "Oh, you shining ones, ye men of God." So they're talking about what the occult world sees these ethereal spirit-like beings, these shining ones. You know, um, that's the pagan occult view, that you've got these gods, you've got these creational forces of light, these ETs. You know, but we can be shining ones in a good sense, in the biblical sense, where we're wise and we're turning to people to righteousness. You know, and in that sense, we look at Christ and at his transfiguration. It said his face did shine as the sun. Um, and he gave a parable. He said that the good seed, which are righteous people, they're going to shine forth as the sun. And so we do have paths of where we can rise above the evil that's around us, but we have to do it. We can't use their dirty tricks. We have to rise in a positive way. Otherwise, all we do is we're like a pair of pigs getting into the mud, or two dogs fighting. We've got to rise above that.
I agree. Well done. Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, hi. How you doing, Fritz? It's really good. Thank
Hi.
you for attending. Hi. Yeah, I must thank you for when you wrote your book. I remember reading it a long time ago, and it really opened my eyes to well, you know, the world. And of course, since then, ruling families has become more or less the standard narrative of thinkers. You know, it's really, I think it's really quite earth-shattering what you did. You know, you brought a new lexicon to, you know, to ordinary people, and you know, and I think through your work, other work has come through, like, you know, work like Lawrence Garnier and stuff like that. You know, it's really amazing what you've done. I was very intrigued listening to your account on ETs and the fact that they may be some kind of supernatural entity. However, one thing that I would like to say, which you may be aware of, that people who follow the Djinn and follow the fairy will do very extreme things to their bodies so that they go into a fractured time, where in that fractured time, which they call fairy time or they call the calf, is when they actually contact these entities. Yeah, I mean, this procedure literally is, you know, it probably goes back to Noah. It's a really old procedure, but I was really fascinated when I was listening to you talking that this so-called mind-based programming really relates so strongly to episodes with fairy, Djinn, and other demonic entities. Yeah, I find it really quite fascinating. I was just wondering if you were actually aware of this technique, which is used by people who participate in like fairy and Djinn worship. Are you aware of it?
Not directly like that, but yes and no. I'm yeah, I bumped into that. So along that lines, the United States has something called the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then the Joint Chiefs of Staff have a group that are like their personal spies, the Joint Intelligence Committee, JIC. And they were directed to create a group called the Collins Elite. And the Collins Elite were directed to investigate what are these UFOs and aliens all about. And they concluded that they were devils from another dimension. Well, definitely they are coming from another dimension. And so they're not coming from way far away. It's just like you're talking about the Djinn and the fairies and everything. These are things that have been around for a long time. And I was listening in the early 90s. This would have been like maybe 1990 or 91. I was listening to a recording of an alien that somebody had made. And he was saying that he was, and I can't remember the specifics, something like 500,000 years old or something like this. And I had to laugh to myself, we should quit calling these people aliens. They've been around longer than we have, you know. They need to at least get resident status. So yeah, these different entities have been around a long time, and people have been interacting with them for a long time. And
yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. 100%. I mean, it's really interesting that you mentioned this, because quite a lot of Muslim Sufi regard the UFO phenomena as nothing more than the Djinn. Yeah. So I think you're more than accurate in what you're saying. And the Sufi religion goes back at least, well, in its present form, about 1,500 years. And so for 1,500 years, they have been stating that all this phenomena that we see in the sky, etc., is in fact entities from a different dimension to ourselves, a parallel universe, if you wish. Yeah. Exactly. But they are able to cross over. Yeah, cross over. So yeah, I think you're 100% accurate in your assumption. Really. The evidence is there.
But does it matter?
Talk about this.
Sorry. Does it matter if we interact with them? Because you interact with them, Brian. Brian interacts with them. Fritz.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is what you have to understand is I've been a lifetime occultist. Yeah. Mm-hmm. However, communicating with like these entities is not something that I do lightly, and it's not something that I do on a regular basis. I just don't do that. Because I'm aware of what the situation is. 90% of my time is spent improving myself through meditation, etc., etc., etc. However, there has been times when I have communicated with these entities, but the point is that I've not used them for malicious purposes. And when I was hearing Fritz talking about how these programming is done on human beings, I was actually quite disgusted, because in reality, I don't see how anybody who can love humanity can torture another human being, from my perspective. And so, I don't think it matters if you're a Christian or whatever. The point is not to harm, and that's my rule, is not to harm, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and so thanks for, I appreciate one thing here is you're stepping outside of the simplistic thinking where people are putting labels on things. I mean, there's a lot of Christian organizations, and I use Christian as not meaning that they're Christ-like, but that they're religious organizations that labeled themselves Christians. They're involved in the trauma-based mind control. And I've exposed the Jehovah's Witnesses, that's the Watchtower Society, as being a front for the Illuminati. The LDS Mormon Church is a front for the Illuminati. A lot of the charismatic churches are being used as a front for the Illuminati. And I have interacted with these Illuminati kingpins, as I said, at one point they were hoping that I would write a history of the Illuminati, and their leaders, the leadership of these power brokers, they're in regular contact with the ET, or aliens, whatever you want to call them, which I would call them fallen angels, and they plan eventually to give this planet to them. So their agenda, which they're getting from the aliens or from these fallen angels, is a non-human agenda. And they have for a long time wanted to create an apocalyptic Armageddon scenario. That's why their front organization, the Watchtower Society, went to every house in the world warning about Armageddon, is they want to build that fear into people that Armageddon is coming. And of course, if you get into the lore or the religious beliefs of different peoples around the world, you'll see that there's a lot of Armageddon type scenarios in their beliefs. that at the end of the world it would all come to some apocalyptic end. So the human race has been programmed this way, and they're trying to take advantage of that, which is just one more reason to be aware of what their agenda is. And in fact, I might just say what Weishaupt openly said. He said the true purpose of the order, that's the order of the Illuminati. This is a direct quote here. The true purpose of the order was to rule the world. To achieve this, it was necessary for the order to destroy all religions, overthrow all governments, and abolish private property. And if you look at the World Economic Forum, that's what they're trying to do. Is the World Economic Forum, by the way, is a front for the Illuminati. Their leadership is Illuminati. They plan to abolish private property. As you probably know, Klaus Schwab has said, you're going to own nothing and be happy. Well, if you own nothing and are happy, that's a sign of mind control right there. You've been...
Yeah, because it's really funny that you mention this, because the early Christians, which we call the Gnostic Christians, speak about the archons. Yeah. And they mention very much the same as what you spoke about. To the letter, almost. To the letter. So yeah, it everything that you're saying makes perfect sense to me. Really. Based on the history.
So what you're seeing real quickly over there in England, and I don't know if it's pervasive or not, but they have started telling people that they could have a universal basic income, 1,600 to 2,000 pounds per month, if they will take a chip in their right hand, and people have been lining up for chip. And that's just one of what I call 4 different things. They've got the CBDCs, that's central bank digital currencies that they're bringing in worldwide. And then the next component is the facial recognition and digital ID that they're bringing in. And they have millions of cameras all throughout the world. People don't realize that their cell phones are cameras that can do facial recognition. And then the third component would be their beast computers, which is a big subject that I've been exposing for a long time, for decades. And then that's married to the fourth component, which is these agendas, about global warming. We need to be sustainable. We've got these vaccines that we're supposed to take. And so you see these 17 sustainable development goals that all the nations of the United Nations agreed on. And you go back and look at these, and you actually, when you look closer at them, see that they're not human. They're not in favor of the human race. They're actually trying to take away from us, because they have this idea or this theory that human emissions, for instance, drives climate change. And if I can slip in a word here, I'd like to say that there was a genius. His name was Milutin Milankovic. And Milankovic is spelled Milankovic. He was a Serbian, very brilliant genius, mathematician, engineer, scientist, climatologist. And as a climatologist, he came up with ways to explain the Earth's climate changes. He had this mathematical theory of climate that could reconstruct past climates and future ones, right? And so they're tampering with his formula. If you look at the research into ice ages, they show that carbon dioxide lags behind temperature changes. So in other words, carbon dioxide levels are like the feedback. They're not the causing factor in climate change, but they're trying to tell us that this is what's driving climate change so that they can take away everything that we have, because we've got this carbon footprint that's dangerous. And going back to the 17 sustainable developmental goals that the UN nations all agreed upon, you're supposed to have responsible consumption. Well, responsible consumption from their vantage point is no carbon footprint, we're to have green and smart.
Yeah, and of course the irony of that is if we have no carbon, we have no life. Plants will not grow. So when I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, they've studied this well, to put it bluntly. Once again, I agree with everything that you were saying. The one thing that you mentioned was the beast computer, something I've not heard of. I don't know what this is. What is the beast computer, please, Fritz?
Well, I had a friend who accidentally bumped into, at the time, this was in the 70s, and there were only 3 beast computers in the world at that time. There was one in Australia, one in South Africa, and one in Alaska. And he, making an extremely long story short, he was out in the middle of nowhere and bumped into this. And the engineer that was in charge of getting it running, and he was about to turn it over to other people, he gave my friend Dale a guided tour. He said, once you're done seeing this, you'll not want to talk about it anyway. And he showed him how, from that point, they could control the world. Back then, you could talk to the computer and she would talk back to you. The voice of the computer was a woman, by the way. So that's why I used the pronoun she. Everything, people weren't aware of it. Now they're more aware of it. That everything about us is being dragged into these computers, and then they're using AI to analyze us. They know us better than we know ourselves. And even back then in the 70s, they could pull strings, like the engineer was telling them, well, think of somebody that you don't think anybody knows about. And so he came up with somebody in his high school class that he thought was a pretty unknown person. And the computer knew all about him. And then the guy goes, well, we can make this guy kill his brother. And Dale was totally skeptical. Yeah, right. And then they asked the computer to come up with a program, a plan to get him to kill his brother. And when he saw what the computer had designed, he was like blown away. He realized that would work. So they're using AI, artificial intelligence, to run these computers and to control the world. And these are called beast computers. They've added more computers to the system since then. There were only 3 back then, but they've added quite a few more, and they're located around the world. I know where some of them are, but I don't know where all of them are, or I don't think I know where all of them are. One in Belgium. There's one on an island near Antarctica that the Norwegians, believe it or not, the Norwegians have an island near Antarctica that's like the furthest from any landmass of any island. So they've got them scattered around the world now, linked together, and pulling in everything about us. And people don't realize that your cell phone's listening to you and watching you, and everything about you is being dragged into these computers and analyzed, and it gives them kind of a godlike ability where they know everything and are omnipresent. And anyway, that's a little bit about the beast computers.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. But may I ask, what are you working on at the moment? Are you working on anything, or is there a new book coming? Or
I wish. I'm supporting my family, and that keeps me busy. I have a beautiful family, a wonderful family, and that is something that's directly in opposition to like the World Economic Forum and what's socially correct. We're supposed to hate children. We're supposed to not want to have children. So to have a beautiful family that's cute and intelligent is going directly against what these people want. Um, that's my little part in making the world a better place.
yeah, we're almost running out of time because you were talking about the Illuminati families and stuff like this, but like for what I understand is they also have, if you like, people that work for them or groups that work for them. And the one that seems to sort of raise my eyebrows is the Tavistock Institute. Do you know about the Tavistock Institute?
Yes, it's not one entity. There's several Tavistock groups, and one part of Tavistock. I mean, they have a good front, like so many of these things. You know, their front is that they're there for us. But the Tavistock Institute has been involved with this trauma-based mind control. There are some, like this one Brit who was in World War One. He was programmed with trauma-based mind control in the UK, clear back in the World War One time period. So, people think that this is just a recent phenomenon, but people like Tavistock have been working on mind control and understanding how people tick for a long time. And one thing that they ran was the Beatles. Beatles, a band in the 1960s, they came out with 100 hits, and they were extremely popular. And that whole thing was organized for social engineering. I don't know how old you are, but I remember the Beatles. And before they came along, there were certain things, society did certain things. And after they came in, they brought in rock and roll, they brought in long hair, they brought in rebellion. I mean, you look at the 50s and the 60s, they were totally different periods of time. The United States had totally changed from the 50s to the 60s. And so there was a lot of social.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, the thing is I'm probably older than what you think. A lot older, probably. I was born in sort of just before the 60s, and I agree with everything that you're saying. That the world of the 40s and 50s was completely alien to that of the 60s. Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was socially engineered. Because such rapid development has to have enormous sponsorship and enormous planning, and what you're saying makes perfect sense. In a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I grew up. In the 50s.
Sorry, you grew up. Yeah, sorry.
In the 50s in the United States, but then in 1960, I moved overseas to Nepal between India and Tibet. When I came back to the United States in 1965, 66 time period, it was a totally different country. And that's why, I got to see the before and after, and where if I had maybe lived through it, maybe I wouldn't have seen the changes wouldn't have been so dramatic.
Well, I'm sure you would have been aware of it. It's the same way as we were aware with, if you like, from the 90s and the computer revolution. You know, you'd have to be living under a rock to miss that, really. You know, to put it bluntly. However, it's interesting that you say about going to India, because most years I spend 6 months in India meditating and developing, which is quite interesting. And whenever I come back to wherever I'm staying, it can be Ukraine, it can be anywhere in the world, I always sort of like notice the difference. But that's only after 6 months. So I'd imagine after your time scale, it must have been a real jar, to put it bluntly. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that, which is really cool. But yeah, thank you very much for talking to me. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I thank you again for your books. Your books have been fairly amazing, and I've enjoyed reading them, which is good. What about you, Chris? Chris?
Yeah. So I'll mention real.
Sorry. Carry on, Fritz.
Oh, just mentioning two of the more important ones were Bloodlines of the Illuminati, which is the Who, and the Illuminati Formula book. I call it the Formula book for short. Illuminati Formula used to create an undetectable total mind-controlled slave, which is the How. And, I encourage people to study those, because it will change your whole view of how the world functions.
Djinn Illuminated is a new book by Brian Barot. It's the result of a lifetime study in occultism. Barot has worked with adepts in India, Africa, and the Yemen. This book allows the reader access to the Djinn. Everything within its pages is authentic. This book has been reviewed by occultists such as J.S. Garrett, who believes it's one of the best books ever written on the subject of Djinn. It's also been reviewed by Sufi masters, namely German Quedo Myers, who believes this is a really good book. Moreover, Christine Hart, Sunday Times best-selling author, she writes, "This book is wonderful, a glorious read. It's not for nothing. Brian Barot has been called the Djinn Master. If you want fame, if you want a better relationship, if you want spiritual awakening, Djinn Illuminated is available on Kindle."